Good to see you from theathletic.com. Ralph Russo joins us on 365 Sports. So tell me about how previous performance-based criteria could affect whatever the heck is going on with the college football playoff in the future.
So I don't think that's a fully baked idea yet, which is why my colleague and I, Chris Vanini, win our story today. And Chris did a lot of the heavy lifting on that one. Couldn't really get into the details. Essentially, there's a meeting, kind of a big college football playoff meeting this week. It's a regularly scheduled one that they usually have around this time of year. They dive into a whole bunch of, business for the year. But part of the thing they're also going to do here is talk about what the format's going to look like in 2026. They have to figure out if they're going to change the seating. And, sort of hanging over all this is this idea that the Big Ten and the SEC have been at least interested, very interested, maybe really want in some cases, depending on who you ask, automatic qualifying bids to the CFP going forward, to maybe expand it to 14, maybe 16, but probably 14, and create a system where they would have 4 bids. Big Ten and the ACC would have 2 each. And then 2 more would go to an at-large. That gives a pathway for Notre Dame. And another one obviously would be reserved for the Group of 5 champion there. That is not set in stone. I think there are a lot of people, most everybody, who don't like that idea. So the idea of coming up with possibly some measurements that would create a pathway for automatic access, but isn't simply granted that access, right? So you'd have to meet certain measurements. And again, I think what's going to happen at this meeting this week, among many other things, is they're going to present some models to the commissioners, which maybe are alternatives or present some alternatives to automatic qualifiers that would, again, check some boxes and take some of the subjectivity off of the plate of the selection committee. I know that I just threw a lot of stuff at you there, but that's what they're trying to work through, is if there maybe are some alternatives to automatic qualifying that every conference could earn.
And Ralph, I think I've asked you this before. I don't understand, especially if you're going to expand the playoff to 14 or 16, like you said, likely 14, what eventuality that they're afraid of that they would go, especially the 2 conferences, or the Big Ten, I guess, is the one who's really pushed for automatic qualifiers, where there's a world where they would go years without getting what they want.
Yeah, I think so. It's tied to 2 things. I think there is a certain amount of, I don't want to say distrust in the selection committee. I think there is skepticism that the selection committee can do what is essentially a very difficult job, right? It is very hard to piece these teams, to pull apart these teams and say, with all the various schedules, there is, very little interaction between, relatively speaking, interaction between these conferences. Now that these conferences are so big, it's just becoming really hard. You're giving the selection committee a really hard job. So is there a way to make that job a little less subjective and a little easier? And I think that there is some concern from the SEC and the Big Ten, which have these tough schedules, that those schedules are not being given enough deference. So I think that's part of it. The other part of it is, especially from the Big Ten standpoint, the SEC has some ideas on this too, is creating these automatic qualifiers also allows you to create some play-in games, which we've talked about before, that enhance your regular season. And also, if your teams are playing for those play-in games, it also keeps your 5th, 6th, 7th, maybe even 8th place team. It gives that team a chance, or a nominal chance, to make it into the playoff come November. So it's not just a matter of hey, they're going to get their 4 teams. Of course they're going to get their 3 to 4 teams. It's more of if you control the selection process and you have a definitive number, you can build out some things around that have to do with the regular season and your own postseason.
ultimately, Ralph, how much say do people outside of Petitti and Sankey have in the end result of whatever direction they go?
Yeah, Chris and I wrote about this, I guess, about a month and a half ago, and I think the contract gives them a lot of leeway to push through what they want. It's no longer unanimity needed to change the format, right? So contractually, they seem to have a lot of power. I do think public perception, I think pushback from the other conferences. Hey, like none of us really want this. And it says that you have to, consult us and give us, a fair chance to voice our opinion. And you're completely ignoring our opinion here. I think there's, the potential blowback from, every conference. All these schools are in states that have senators, right? Like, and if North Carolina suddenly has all of its teams relegated to trying to get 2 playoff spots, that might tick off some people on Capitol Hill. So I do think that like this buildup of public pressure could matter. And I do also wonder if contractually, again, if they simply blow off their partner conferences here, if that does trigger some contractual avenues that could be challenged from these other conferences. So I guess my answer to that is I don't think it means nothing, but I also think that that the SEC and the Big Ten do have a lot of power here.
Yeah, that's I would love to be in those rooms. We've asked those who have been, whether ADs or presidents, because a lot of times it has nothing, commissioners, and you kind of get a different, it seemed like that everyone else is just there, and the Big 12 or Big 10 and the SEC are going to make the decisions. And yet we had somebody on last week that mentioned something about, it was the new SMU, Damon Evans, who's now at SMU. He was at Maryland and Georgia.
Sure. Yeah.
And he kind of said that he never got the impression that those 2 conferences wanted to basically just blink on everybody else. I don't know if I believe that.
Overwhelmed by your inbox? Clean Email is here to help. Organize, clean, and manage your emails with powerful automation tools. Say goodbye to spam and clutter and enjoy a stress-free inbox. Try Clean Email today at cleanemail.com. That's CLEAN email.com.
Well, I guess what I would say is I do think there is some recognition that collaboration and doing what's best for college football as a whole is the job here, is the task at hand. I think there is some acknowledgement that they need to be thinking beyond just their own kingdoms here, the SEC and the Big Ten kingdom. However, I think in the case of Greg Sankey, I think his open-mindedness to collaboration was damaged a lot after the last round, after we got to this point, right? The whole alliance, and it slowed down expansion. And I think the SEC and Greg and like in general felt like they had sort of been very collaborative and were giving up a lot or were accommodating the rest of the conferences a lot. And then all of a sudden they got pushed back on that. So I feel like from Greg's standpoint, as much as I think ultimately he would like to be collaborative, I think he might be a little less likely to be collaborative now than he was then. As for the Big Ten and Tony Petitti, I just don't know if Petitti walking into this situation after, relatively recently, only about a year, 2 years ago. I can't remember when he was even hired now. It's been relatively recently. Like, I don't know if he holds that same spirit of collaboration. And I think he is a disruptor by nature and looks at all of this stuff in college sports and says, well, I got a better idea. Why don't we do this? And why don't we do that? So I think from his standpoint, it's not so much a lack of collaboration or wanting to overrun everybody. I just think that he looks at it and says, I think there's a better way to trap this mouse.
I never thought about Greg Sankey and the alliance, the fly in the ointment that they were. I wonder if Jim Phillips still wakes up at night mad about getting snookered about that by the Big Ten.
Listen, I mean, I talk to a lot of people who point to that and, will really say like, hey, man, like in some ways, I understand the ACC and the Big 12 are at a disadvantage now. And the ACC especially, because it was the ACC, the Pac-12, the then Pac-12, which was, seems like a million years ago when George Kliavkoff was running the Pac-12 and Kevin Warren at the Big Ten sort of came together, formed this alliance. And really, like, if you think about it, if they hadn't been obstructionists then, maybe we would have a better outcome now. And you're right. I do think Jim Phillips especially probably has to think to himself, like, boy, how, like, if I didn't do that then, what would be the result now? Maybe I brought some of this upon myself.
Ralph, there's a couple of questions I want to get to. One more about just the way conferences are aligned because of all of what happened from the Texas OU, a story by Brett Zerneman, to USC, UCLA, and then everything else with the Big 12 adding, et cetera. There will be speculation. There are basically almost like ambulance chasers who want to report about realignment. And yet there's time. There's 3, 5, 7 years or whatever with time. When do you think any speculation about any changes, if at all, will be legitimate?
We always get the realignment on this show. We always get it's as reliable as
I don't see anything.
April showers.
Yeah, I don't see anything imminent. No, nothing imminent.
Nothing. No, and guys, I'm kidding with you. There's nothing imminent, and I do think, as a lot of people speculated, when the ACC reached that agreement with Clemson and Florida State to finally put down their weapons and settle the lawsuits, I think we're on about a 5-year timetable here, right? 2030, I think, was when the ACC sort of set up a situation where teams might be able to look at, maybe kind of getting out of that deal. So I would think, what's the timetable? That if you just look back on what we've gone through with conference realignment, usually it's about a year or two out of when the television deals end. Well, I think the Big 10's deal, I think, ends in 2030. The Big 12's, I think, is 2031 or 32. SEC is right around there. So I would think in 2028, 2029, probably 2028, we'd start hearing about, okay, what is the next iteration of this thing? And here's something I think I've told you guys, but I always try to stress to people. Just because what we have seen happen in conference realignment, I don't think what we have seen happen in conference realignment necessarily foretells the future about what we will see. I think that there's a lot of factors here that we don't know, including the state of the media business and cable and streaming and what ESPN looks like and what Fox looks like, that will influence what the next iteration of major college football looks like going forward. We've seen Super League proposals and all that stuff. So we have to be a little bit imaginative here. You might be looking at something that we can't even think up, and it doesn't really look like the traditional conference structure anymore.
Ralph, they are eliminating, because of the impending House settlement, 150 plus rules from the books that have to do with amateurism. I would make the suggestion that whatever iteration college sports governance takes in the next one, that 150 overall might be the number of rules that you have, as opposed to 150 just about one thing, which has probably led us to this point that we are right now.
Yeah, without question. The NCAA rule book is going to be streamlined and deregulated, but honestly, like what they did today, and the NCAA came out with a little bit of announcement. They pressed a proposal. I won't bore you with too many of the details on that, but we all knew this was coming. It sets the stage for if and when, probably if, but probably when, as opposed to if, the settlement is approved by Judge Wilkin, maybe in the next few days, even possibly, they can transition to implementing the settlement rules into NCAA rules, which essentially means, just think of it from this way, guys. How many things in the NCAA rule book are you can't pay the players? Well, now you can. Now you can pay the athletes. So they have to eliminate a whole bunch of rules that say you can't pay the athletes. I mean, just that is just the start of it. So they redlined a whole bunch of stuff, and they need to get out ahead of this stuff because eventually the settlement is probably going to get approved. So today's move is pending settlement approval, but it just clears the way for implementation of the settlement through NCAA rules. And the NCAA itself is becoming a less influential organization, right? There's going to be a whole arm of enforcement of the settlement rules, the quote unquote salary cap, the rev share cap, roster limits, things along those lines, regulation about what NIL deals are approved. That's all going to be outside the NCAA. There's an enforcement arm that's essentially being built by the Power Four conferences.
Ralph Russo, theathletic.com with us on 365 Sports. You're telling me people can get paid now? Like there's no amateurism?
I hear, yeah. I mean, it's I know it's shocking that there's gambling in this establishment, right? I mean,
do you
all
realize,
these years,
yeah,
nobody was ever paid. No college athlete has ever been paid until now, right?
You and I are of the age, and I'm not trying to put you at my age because I'm older than everybody that's probably watching other than 5 people, but it was honestly something that I understood if it eventually changed, but I never thought I would see it in my lifetime. I never did. And I'm glad that it's here. The only problem is it's such a cluster blank that it's just hard to watch.
Yeah. Listen, we're not getting there smoothly. It would have been a little nicer if maybe the NCAA and the conferences and the people who lead college sports, I hate always putting it directly on this faceless bureaucracy of the NCAA. You know, the schools and the presidents and the ADs are just as much in charge. It would have been nice if at some point somebody got out in front of this, and maybe 10, 15 years ago when the O'Bannon case came down, somebody finally said, hey, if we don't do this ourselves, it's going to be forced upon us. But here we are.
Yeah, here we are. Last thing is we've mentioned the settlement. We've tried to not stay away from it because it's there. We know it's there and we know what it might do. What will still be a problem in college athletics, and let's say football for now, or men's basketball, what will still be a problem no matter if it's approved or not that will not be corrected?
Oh, I mean, dude, this is all and I don't, so I'm like, that sounds terribly skeptical of my part and pessimistic. What I mean by that is, and I've talked to people who are really in the weeds trying to figure this stuff out at the NCAA level, ADs, there, like, once we get to the settlement and there are some rules in place, there is still going to be probably at least 2-3 years of trial and error of like, okay, we want to do this, but how exactly does that play out? Oh, we didn't really see that coming. Got to adjust that. Got to fine tune this. Like this is not an end point. This is not a solution. Okay, it's all good now. Everybody, puppies, rainbows, and sugarcane. You know, like we are sailing into a new era. You know, with everything perfect. It is not the way. That is not the way that this is going to transpire. Like it should be better, but we're still clunkily moving along this road to a better system, as opposed to like, we have not arrived at that better system. We're still going to kind of learn as we go how much of this system and how much of this settlement, you know, stands the test of time and gets codified by legislation and gets challenged with more lawsuits. No, baby, we are far from the end of this. We are just, in some ways, we're just getting started, folks.
I would love to know by the end of all of this, when that is approved, and well, I'm not saying it's going to be approved. We don't know how much money the NCAA spent on legal issues.
Oh boy,
that it's not going to be as much as 2.4 billion or the billion, whatever that is, that's going to be the class action or whatever it is. But I'd just love to know. I mean, millions upon millions upon millions of dollars because they were stubborn.
Guys, if I was a better reporter, I would have this on the top of my head. But actually, I'll give you a little, like Steve Berkowitz from USA Today has done a great job over the years of tracking that number. Those numbers are available in way, shape, and it is hundreds of millions of dollars if you date back to like the O'Bannon case and other cases, you know, the Alston case that went to the Supreme Court. Yeah, the legal fees have been astronomical. basically to mostly come out on the losing end and have to concede on most of your points anyway.
Could have gotten out in like 1999 or 2000 for about $2,800 a month to start. Like seriously, could have. If
Definitely
you would have
in the early 2000s. Yeah, definitely in the early 2000s, 2010s. I mean, again, not to go relitigate all this history. But there were off-ramps here that the NCAA chose to pass and ended up driving right off the bridge.
Absolutely.
Right? Like last exit. Nope, we're going through here. And it ended up right in a ditch.
Ralph, we have a super chat that goes on during the show that sometimes it's its own show. But there are a lot of, they love college athletics. What will be first, a super conference or the next realignment?
A Super League, you mean?
Super League, yeah.
So I can't answer that because I actually think that's the question.
Yes.
I think it's not which is first. I think is it one or the other? Is it, do we continue this conference structure moving forward, or does the biggest brands within all these conferences, what a guy I like to talk to a lot, in fact, I think you've had him on as a guest, Bob Thompson, former Fox executive, who's really interesting in this space. I think the term he uses is the up and out, which is not necessarily adding to the conferences or throwing teams out of the conferences, is what happens when the biggest brands in the current conferences say, you know what, we see something more interesting than the Big Ten or the SEC, and we're going to band together and take all this, I don't know, private equity money. I kid around all the time, and I'm only half joking. You know, in 5 years, all of this could be owned by the Saudis, right? So, and again, like, that's tongue in cheek, but there's a modicum of truth to tell people, like, there could be some enormous changes coming down the road that we might have a hard time grasping, like, what exactly is the catalyst for them, because we just don't see them coming, because maybe we're not media experts or we're not financial experts, and we don't know what global markets will do. God knows that's been hard to follow over the last couple of weeks. So there's a lot of stuff that could impact college sports that are not directly involved in college sports. So Super League, conference realignment, I think the choice is an either or, as opposed to which comes first.
Who is the greatest alum from Fordham University?
I mean, Vince Lombardi.
There you go. That's an easy one. Yep.
Of course.
I love the shirt.
Well, it's my alma mater. And if you want to go back a little further, this is I'm sure only you will remember. I think you got to be a pretty big baseball fan. The Fordham Flash, Frankie Frisch. Major League Baseball Hall of Famer from like 1930 something or other, a little before my time.
Well, it's great that Lombardi that wins. That will win because I'm old enough, and anyone, that's what they named the damn trophy after. So we know what Vince Lombardi means. Hey man, Ralph, great stuff. Appreciate your time, man.
Thank you very much. Shout out to the 7 blocks of granite.
There we go.
There we go.
Fordham Rams. Ralph Russo with us, theathletic.com.